In the quiet record of early America, one place keeps its shape like a faded ink mark on a map: Roanoke. Names, dates, and shorelines are clear, yet the ending stays out of reach. You're listening to Night History Story, and tonight we follow the first English lost colony, from hopeful plans to a silent clearing. Please subscribe and comment a topic for the next video. Chapter 1. A Royal Dream. In the spring of 1584, London was a city of timbered houses, narrow lanes, and busy wharves along the River Thames. Papers with wax seals moved between rooms with heavy tables and tall windows, and the air smelled of ink, rope, and river water. In those rooms, Sir Walter Raleigh pursued a document that could turn a private ambition into an official venture. Raleigh was a courtier and a soldier, and he understood how much depended on a few lines of legal text. The patent he received from Queen Elizabeth I in 1584 gave him rights to explore and colonize lands not already claimed by a Christian prince, and to govern settlements there under the crown. The words sat on parchment, but they pointed toward the Atlantic, toward charts that showed only fragments of coastline and large empty spaces. For England, the Atlantic coast of North America was both promise and problem. Spanish power was anchored in the Caribbean and in fortified towns, and French fishing fleets knew the northern waters. Yet England wanted a foothold that could support trade, privateering, and long-range navigation. On a wooden table, a map could make that plan seem simple. A line from a port in the west of England to an inlet in a distant sandbank. Raleigh did not plan to cross himself at first. He planned reconnaissance, information, and a clear report that could persuade investors and officials. In a storeroom, barrels and casks could be counted by chalk marks. In a shipyard, planks and tar could be measured by the hand and the eye, and every item suggested a future life on shore: nails for a frame, axes for timber, and seeds for a field. In April 1584, two small ships left England on a voyage associated with Philip Amadis and Arthur Barlow. Their course carried them south and west over open water toward a coast that later generations would call the Outer Banks. The ships were wooden, square-rigged, and tight with supplies, and their decks were crowded with coils of rope and spare spars. By midsummer, the expedition reached the Barrier Islands off what is now North Carolina. The shoreline was long and pale, with dunes like low hills and dark lines of marsh behind them. The sounds of wind and surf were constant, and the air carried the sharp scent of salt and sun-warmed sand. The visitors met Algonquian-speaking communities who knew the inlets, the fishing grounds, and the mainland rivers. First contact depended on gestures, interpreters made by circumstance, and careful exchange of objects. A small metal tool or a bright bead could sit in a palm, and meaning could travel faster than language. The expedition explored, took notes, and gathered impressions that would soon become persuasive writing in England. Descriptions of fertile ground, abundant fish, and friendly people were written for readers who had never seen the shallow waters of a sound or the thin line of an island that shifted with storms. A report could be read aloud in a room with candles, and listeners could imagine a settlement rising near a calm inlet. Two men, Montejo and Wanchese, traveled back across the Atlantic with the expedition. They became living proof of contact, and a bridge to a place that Raleigh and his supporters wanted to reach again. In an English household, their clothing and bearing would have drawn attention, and every conversation around them added urgency to the next voyage. That first trip did not build a colony. It built expectation. In a ledger, costs were written down, and in a prayer book, a reader might mark a page with a strip of cloth. On the docks, the talk turned toward larger ships, more men, and a settlement that could hold through winter. In late 1584 and early 1585, the idea of an English foothold gathered momentum. Plans moved from the language of exploration to the language of permanence, carpenters, soldiers, and supplies that could last. The first dream was a clear one, a distant shore, a small fort, and a steady stream of ships returning with news and goods. For a moment, the route felt measurable, like a line drawn with a straight edge. A ship could sail out, return, and sail again. A list could be written, checked, and sealed with wax. The hard part, the part still unmeasured, waited on a strip of sand beside a broad sound where the sea and the land never stopped changing. A brief recap settles in like a page turned softly. By 1584, Raleigh had a royal patent, and England had a fresh report of the Outer Banks coast. The next step would be a larger expedition that tested whether a shore described in writing could support a real community. Chapter 2. The first shoreline. In the spring of 1585, ships gathered for a more serious attempt, with soldiers, specialists, and the equipment of a small outpost. On deck, casks were wedged against the rail, and iron tools were packed in chests that could be dragged onto sand. The voyage was longer and more complex, and it carried not only ambition, but responsibility. The expedition is often linked with Sir Richard Grenville, and it included Ralph Lane, who would act as governor in the first settlement effort. Men traveled with weapons, armor, and powder, and their clothing was heavy for the heat of a Carolina summer: wool and leather, metal fittings, and belts that held knives. On a crowded deck, the shine of a helmet could flash in sun and then disappear under canvas. The Outer Banks were not a single solid coast, but a barrier system, inlets, shoals, and long spits of sand. Navigation depended on soundings and cautious steering, and mistakes could break a ship on a bar. The sea here was shallow in places, and the water changed color above sand, from deep blue to green, and then to pale, almost clear. When the expedition reached the region, it relied again on contact with local communities. Mateo, who had returned from England, was an important presence, and his knowledge of language and custom mattered in every meeting near a village or along a canoe landing. A shoreline gathering could include men in English doublets and men with painted skin and woven ornaments, standing under the same flat light. The English selected Roanoke Island as a base, a place within the sounds behind the barrier islands. Roanoke Island sat between bodies of water, with tree cover, creeks, and access to the mainland by canoe routes. It was not the mainland itself, but it felt protected from the open ocean, and protection was a constant concern. The first work on shore was practical. A camp needed a cooking area with a fire pit, a place to store powder away from sparks, and shelter from sudden rain. Men cut timber, and the sound of axes in pine and oak carried through the trees, mixing with the calls of birds and the distant hush of surf. Diplomacy was not a side task. It was the condition of survival. A settlement needed local food sources, guidance through waterways, and calm relations to prevent raids or reprisals. In meetings, objects moved between hands, a metal blade, a copper piece, a string of beads, and each exchange was recorded in memory and sometimes in writing. Misunderstanding arrived easily. An English expectation of hierarchy did not match local political structures, and local expectations about reciprocity did not match English ideas of trade. A single incident over a stolen cup or a missing tool could harden feelings, because both sides took objects seriously as markers of honor and obligation. The settlers also tried to learn geography, and they sent parties across the sounds and onto the mainland. A small boat could slide into a marsh channel lined with reeds. A man with a notebook could sketch a river bend, and a compass could turn in a hand as if it could tame uncertainty. Reports came back of villages and fields, and also of distance and complexity. The mainland was not an empty space for simple occupation. It was a lived landscape with alliances and rivalries. For a small English group, every mile of travel consumed strength, and every return to the fort brought relief. Roanoke Island could feel quiet at midday, with sunlight filtering through leaves onto sandy soil. Yet it was never truly calm. The fort was a visible marker of intrusion, a wooden palisade and a few structures that changed the meaning of the place. Even the simple act of planting a flag altered the atmosphere around a clearing. In England, supporters expected results. They expected proof that this coast could become a base for commerce and further exploration. On Roanoke, those expectations took the form of pressure to send news, to gather intelligence, and to endure conditions that were harder than the first glowing reports had suggested. Resupply was already a shadow over daily life. The colony depended on ships for powder, clothing, tools, and many kinds of food. Local resources could supplement, but planning depended on the assumption that ships would arrive on time. A calendar scratched on a board, or a mark cut into a post, could become a measure of hope. A brief recap settles the scene again. By 1585, an English expedition had returned with soldiers and builders, choosing Roanoke Island as a base within the Sounds. Contact with local communities continued, but the settlement already depended on diplomacy and the uncertain timing of ships. Chapter 3. The Lane Colony. In the summer and autumn of 1585, the first Roanoke settlement under Ralph Lane began to take a recognizable shape. The fort area included rough buildings with blank walls, a workspace where tools lay on benches, and a guarded store for powder and shot. Outside the palisade, the trees and marshes pressed close, as if the island watched the newcomers carefully. Lane faced two linked tasks: keep his men alive and gather information about the region. Exploration parties traveled in small boats along the sounds and up rivers, stopping near villages and returning with reports. A boat hull scraped on mud at low tide, and men stepped out with wet boots, carrying muskets and small packs. The English tried to manage relations with local leaders, including those connected to the CROATOAN and nearby groups. Records mention a leader known as Wingina, later called Pemisapan, and the relationship between him and the settlers became strained. Meetings that began with exchange could turn tense when promises were not met, or when one side believed the other had taken advantage. Food was a central issue, and it shaped diplomacy more than speeches or gestures. The settlers wanted corn and fish, and local communities had seasonal rhythms and priorities. A stored basket of corn in a village could represent a winter plan, not a surplus for trade. When the English demanded more than was comfortable to give, resentment followed. Weather and the landscape added their own pressure. Drought conditions are mentioned in later accounts, and even without drought, agriculture on barrier islands could be limited by sandy soil and salt. A small field behind a palisade looked fragile compared to the broad wetlands and forests that surrounded it. The men also faced the stress of isolation. Roanoke was far from England, and every delay felt larger at that distance. Letters could not travel quickly, and commands from patrons could not adjust to sudden changes on shore. A wooden fort could become a kind of closed world, with the same faces, the same routines, and the same worries. In this atmosphere, small conflicts carried weight. A lost hatchet, a broken tool, an insult interpreted through an interpreter, any of these could become a turning point. The English had firearms and metal armor, but they were few. Local communities had numbers, knowledge of terrain, and the ability to withdraw cooperation. Lane and his officers attempted to assert control through displays of strength and through punitive actions, a pattern that often backfired. Some accounts describe the seizure of food and retaliation for perceived offenses. A musket resting on a fort wall could serve as a warning, but it could not create trust. Exploration continued despite these strains, partly because Lane hoped to find a better site, and partly because intelligence mattered to Raleigh. The English looked toward the Chesapeake region, drawn by rumors of deeper harbors and perhaps greater opportunity. A map sketched from local descriptions could show a chain of rivers leading inland, and those pencil lines could tempt planners far away. As winter approached, supply problems sharpened. Imported food and clothing wore down, and local support became less reliable. A thin cloak, damp from rain, could hang beside a small fire, and the smell of smoke clung to everything. Men who had expected adventure faced the slow grind of hunger and uncertainty. In the spring of 1586, tension with local groups reached a crisis point. Records indicate that Wingina was killed in a confrontation involving Lane and his men. The details are described differently in different retellings, and the larger point is clear. The relationship had broken so badly that violence replaced negotiation. After that, the settlement became more exposed because retaliation was always possible and cooperation was much less likely. Then a new force arrived from the sea, Sir Francis Drake and a fleet moving through the Atlantic. Drake was engaged in broader conflict with Spanish power, and his appearance off the Carolina coast in June 1586 changed Lane options. The fort that had seemed permanent now looked like a temporary camp, and the decks of English ships offered a way out. Lane decided to evacuate. Men carried what they could, including weapons and some supplies, from the fort to the boats. The palisade remained on the island, a wooden outline in the trees, but the life inside it was lifted away. On the water, the sound of oars and the creak of rigging replaced the steady rustle of leaves. Not long after, Grenville arrived with supplies, but the main group was gone. Accounts say he left a small number of men behind to hold the claim, a handful meant to keep an English presence alive. Their names and fates are not firmly documented, and the island itself offered no public sign of their daily life after the ships sailed away. Back in England, the story was complicated. There had been a foothold and a fort, and there had been conflict and retreat. Supporters could focus on the possibilities, while critics could point to the failures. In a chamber with papers spread out on a table, the question became whether to try again and how to change the plan. A brief recap steadies the timeline. The Lane Colony of 1585 to 1586 built a fort and explored the sounds and rivers, but resupply and diplomacy did not hold. After conflict and a crisis of food and safety, the settlers evacuated with Drake in 1586, leaving only uncertain traces behind. Chapter 4. A second attempt. In late 1586 and early 1587, planning returned to desks and storerooms in England. The setting was different from the Carolina shore, a room with a window looking over rooftops, and a table where a list of names could be read out. This time, the plan aimed for permanence, not just a soldier outpost. Raleigh and his backers prepared an expedition that included families. That detail mattered, because families meant houses, gardens, and a social structure that could reproduce itself. The presence of women and children also meant higher stakes and different needs: cloth, tools for domestic work, and a steadier supply of food. John White was appointed governor of the new group. He was also an artist, and his drawings from earlier voyages became some of the best visual records of the region. Images of plants, animals, and people. A sheet of paper with watercolor marks could capture a fish, a flower, or a village scene with a precision that a written description could not. The intended destination was not Roanoke Island itself, but farther north, toward the Chesapeake Bay. Planners wanted a better harbor and a stronger base. The Outer Banks had proved dangerous for ships and difficult for long-term supply, and reports suggested that the Chesapeake offered deeper water and perhaps more opportunity. In April 1587, ships left England with the new colonists. The voyage was uneasy, as Atlantic crossings often were, with cramped quarters, damp bedding, and constant attention to weather. A child might sit near a chest on deck, while sailors adjusted lines and watched the color of the sky. When they reached the Carolina coast, decisions and constraints pushed them back toward Roanoke. The reasons are debated in historical accounts, including the actions of the pilot, Simon Fernandez, and the practical demands of the moment. What is clear is that the colonists were put ashore at Roanoke rather than being carried on to the Chesapeake as planned. Roanoke Island offered a familiar clearing and the remains of past work. The fort area was still a place that could be occupied, even if its buildings were damaged or overgrown. The new colonists found the site altered by time, with boards warped, posts darkened, and the surrounding woods reclaiming the edges. The group also sought news of the men Grenville had left behind in 1586. Accounts suggest they found evidence of violence and abandonment, but the details are not complete, and the island did not offer a clear explanation. A broken chest, scattered debris, or a ruined shelter could hint at events without recording them. Despite this, the colonists began to settle. They repaired structures, gathered firewood, and organized living spaces. A cooking pot hung over a hearth, and cloth was stretched for shade. The routines of family life began to exist beside the routines of a frontier outpost. Diplomacy had to be rebuilt, but the earlier conflict made it harder. Some local people remained friendly, especially those connected to Manteo, who had maintained ties with the English. Yet other groups remembered the Lane period, the shortages, and the violence. A canoe arriving quietly at a shore landing could bring either trade or tension. In August 1587, a child was born to the settlers, Virginia Dare, the granddaughter of John White. The birth took place on Roanoke Island, in a rough house with wooden walls and a small bed. In later memory, that birth became a symbol, a small life representing a new English beginning in North America. Manteo was baptized and formally recognized with a title linked to English authority. The ceremony, as described in English records, involved Christian ritual and public acknowledgement. A simple cross made of wood or a basin of water could mark the moment, and it was meant to bind alliance as much as faith. Still, the practical problems remained. Supplies were limited, and the colony needed more food, tools, and trade goods. The settlers urged White to return to England for help. He faced a painful decision: leave families behind on a contested shore, or stay and risk slow collapse without resupply. White chose to sail for England in late August 1587. On the beach, the colonists watched small boats carry him out to the ship, and the ship itself was a dark shape against bright water. Letters and requests went with him, and the colony watched the horizon, hoping that the absence would be short. A brief recap brings the pieces together again. In 1587, a second English settlement was planted at Roanoke, this time with families and John White as governor. Virginia Dare was born there in August, and soon after, White sailed for England to secure supplies, leaving the colony to hold its place. Chapter 5. War and Waiting in. The autumn of 1587, White returned to a familiar world of English ports, stone churches, and busy streets, but his mind stayed on the wooden houses on Roanoke Island. His task was simple to state and hard to carry out: gather men and supplies and return quickly. On a desk, letters could be folded and sealed, but ships did not always obey schedules. England was entering a period of intense naval conflict. War with Spain shaped the use of ships, crews, and resources. Privateering voyages and defense preparations pulled attention away from colonial resupply. A ship that might have carried barrels of meal and spare tools could be reassigned to patrol or to escort. In 1588, the Spanish Armada threatened England, and the country focused on survival and defense. Coastal towns watched the sea with renewed fear and readiness, and churches filled with prayers. In that atmosphere, a distant colony on the Carolina Sounds could seem secondary, even if it mattered deeply to Raleigh and White. White attempted to return with 2 small vessels in 1588, but the effort failed. Accounts mention encounters with hostile ships and the loss of supplies, and the venture was abandoned. The details of each clash at sea are not the focus tonight, and the result is what matters for Roanoke. Time was slipping away. The delay turned months into years. By a hearth in England, White could imagine the colony living through summer heat, autumn storms, and winter scarcity. He had left behind a plan for what the settlers should do if they needed to move, including an agreed sign to indicate distress. The plan was simple: a message carved into wood, with a mark to show whether danger forced the move. In 1589, efforts to organize a return continued, but ships and funding were limited. Raleigh faced his own pressures, political and financial, and the colonial project was only one part of his larger position at court. Papers moved between hands, and decisions were made in rooms far from salt marsh and pine. During this waiting time, the likely life of the Roanoke settlers can be described only with caution. Records from the settlement itself do not survive in a steady stream. Historians infer what might have been needed: shelter, food, defense, and local relationships, but the precise day-to-day story is missing. What is known is the environment they faced. The Outer Banks region included shifting inlets and severe storms, and mainland travel depended on boats and knowledge of waterways. A wooden house could be damaged by wind and rain, and a small store of grain could be ruined by damp or pests. Even a well-made plan could fail in such conditions. Relations with local communities would have remained central. Trade could provide corn and fish, and friendship could provide guidance. Yet distrust from earlier years could limit options, and an English group could be seen as a burden or a threat. A meeting on a sandy shore might include careful distance, hands visible, and items placed on the ground rather than passed directly. The settlers also had a reason to consider relocation. Roanoke Island was not the intended permanent site, and there were known communities nearby, including CROATOAN, associated with people living on Hatteras Island. Manteo ties suggested that CROATOAN might be a place of relative safety. The mainland also offered more agricultural potential than a barrier island. If the colonists moved, they would have carried essential objects: iron tools, a few firearms, metal cooking pots, cloth, and perhaps a small chest of documents. A family might pack bedding, a wooden bowl, and a Bible. The act of moving would leave behind an emptier fort, a few posts, and signs that the woods would soon soften. All of this remained unknown to White as he waited. He lived with a sense of duty and with the knowledge that every season changed the chances. An ink line on a letter could become a kind of prayer, asking for a ship, a captain, and a safe crossing. At last, in 1590, White joined an expedition that could carry him back toward the Carolina coast. The ships were part of a larger voyage, and the Roanoke visit was not the only goal. Even now, the colony was one objective among others, and that reality shaped how much time could be spent searching. As the ships approached the Outer Banks in late summer 1590, the coastline returned like a remembered image: pale sand, low dunes, and dark water behind the barrier. The sea was unsettled, and navigation remained risky. For White, every mile closer brought a tightening focus, as if the horizon itself held an answer. A brief recap keeps the rhythm calm. White left Roanoke in August 1587 and expected a short absence, but war at sea and the Spanish Armada crisis delayed him. By 1590, the colony had been without direct English support for 3 years, and only a return voyage could show what remained. Chapter 6. The Return to Roanoke. In August 1590, the ships reached the waters near Roanoke Island, where shallow bars and narrow channels forced careful movement. Boats had to feel their way through, and sailors watched the color of the water for sand. The air was thick and warm, and the tree line on the island looked still, almost indifferent. White came ashore with men who carried muskets and wearing damp sea clothes that clung at the knees. They walked toward the old settlement site through brush and sandy ground. The fort area had changed, and the first impression was not of a living village, but of a place that had been taken apart. The buildings were gone or dismantled. The palisade appeared reduced, and the area looked cleared and quiet. There were no fresh smoke trails, no voices, no movement of animals penned near houses. The silence was the first fact that could not be argued. White searched for the sign that had been arranged. The settlers had agreed that if they left, they would carve the destination into a post or tree, and if they left under threat, they would add a crossmark. White found a word carved into wood: CROATOAN. Another carving, CRO, is described in some accounts as being on a tree. The crossmark was not seen, which suggested a planned move rather than a hurried flight. The carved word was both clear and limited. It pointed to CROATOAN, the name used by the English for a nearby place and people associated with Hatteras Island. It did not explain why the move happened, how many people moved, or whether they were safe. It was a direction without a story. White also looked for personal traces. He had left a chest with goods and papers, and he expected that some items might remain. Accounts mention that some chests were found buried, and the goods inside were damaged by weather. A damp book, a rusted tool, or cloth turned to pulp could show that time had passed without care. The search took place under practical constraints. The ships could not linger indefinitely, and weather was already a concern. The Outer Banks could change quickly, with wind shifting and surf rising. The crew watched the sky, and every delay carried risk to the ships themselves. White wanted to go to CROATOAN to follow the clue, yet the attempt was frustrated by conditions at sea. Storms and navigation problems interfered, and the ships faced the danger of grounding on bars. White wrote later of anchors lost and of forced decisions that pulled them away from the coast. In the end, White left the region without reaching CROATOAN. The moment is one of the most haunting in the written record, not because it is dramatic, but because it is unfinished. A ship turned away from a shore, and the one clear instruction carved in wood remained untested. Back in England, the story became a mystery with a fixed set of facts. There had been a settlement and there had been a return. The site was empty, and the word CROATOAN was carved where a message should be. Everything else was inference, rumor, or later reconstruction. It is important to keep the unknown in its proper place. The absence of bodies and the lack of a distress mark do not prove a peaceful outcome, and they do not prove a disaster either. The records are incomplete, and the geography offers multiple possibilities. The only firm anchor is what White saw: an abandoned settlement and a carved destination. The Outer Banks landscape itself helps explain why the record could vanish. Wood decays quickly in damp air. Sand shifts and buries objects. Storm surge can tear through a site and scatter remains. Even a well-built structure could leave little behind after a few seasons of weather. The Roanoke story did not end in 1590 because people continued to look for answers. Yet 1590 fixed the central image: a cleared place, posts and trees, and a single word cut into the grain. That image, repeated in books and on stage, often overshadows the slower work of later searching. A brief recap holds the key details gently. In 1590, White returned to Roanoke and found the settlement abandoned and dismantled. The message CROATOAN was carved as a clue, with no distress sign, but storms and risk prevented White from following the clue to CROATOAN. Chapter 7. Rumors and Searches. In the years after 1590, the English did not abandon the dream of settlement, but they shifted focus. New plans formed in new rooms, with different investors and different goals. When Jamestown was founded in 1607, it became the main English foothold, and the Roanoke story began to live as a shadow beside it. Some later reports suggested that survivors of Roanoke might have joined local communities. English colonists at Jamestown heard stories about people who spoke English or had European objects. These reports appear in writings from the early 17th century, but they are filtered through distance, politics, and the unreliable way rumors travel along rivers and between villages. The most cited hints come from individuals like John Smith and later writers such as William Strachey, who recorded stories of possible survivors. The accounts vary, and historians debate what weight to give them. A rumor might begin with a metal tool seen in a village and end as a story of entire families living far inland. Raleigh and others also sponsored attempts to search earlier than Jamestown, including voyages that looked along the Outer Banks. One later search effort associated with Samuel Mace in 1602 is sometimes mentioned, focused on the Croatoan area, yet it did not resolve the mystery. Searches faced the same obstacles as White had faced: storms, shallow bars, and limited time. The idea that survivors moved to Croatoan has a practical logic. Croatoan was a known place with known allies, and it was close enough for travel by canoe and small boats. If settlers needed help, moving toward friendly contacts would have been reasonable. Yet logic is not proof, and the absence of a direct English follow-up in 1590 leaves the story without confirmation. Another proposed possibility is that the colonists attempted to move toward the Chesapeake as originally planned. If they did, it would have required boats, guidance, and time. The mainland waterways are complex, and the distance is not small. A group traveling with children and supplies would have moved slowly, camping along banks and relying on local knowledge. There is also the possibility of multiple outcomes, some people moving one way, others another way, and some dying along the way. Mixed outcomes are common in historical crises, and they leave uneven traces. A few individuals could be absorbed into a community, while others could be lost to illness or conflict, and the record might preserve none of it clearly. Early English settlements elsewhere show how quickly small groups could weaken. Illness, contaminated water, and poor nutrition could reduce numbers in a season. A well-used metal pot could outlast its owners and be traded onward. A wooden house could vanish completely, leaving only stains and soil that later eyes might never notice. Over time, the Roanoke narrative attracted additions that are not supported by solid evidence. Stories of secret messages, coded carvings, and dramatic rescues appear in later retellings. Some artifacts, such as the so-called Dare stones, have been widely judged to be fraudulent or at least deeply suspect, and they do not provide a reliable path to the truth. What remains most credible? is the geography and the documents closest to the events. White account, the 1590 observation, and the known relationships with local people, like Mateo, carry the most weight. Beyond that, historians build cautious interpretations and leave space for uncertainty. In modern times, archaeology has added careful hints without offering a final answer. Excavations around the Fort Raleigh area on Roanoke Island have identified settlement traces, though the exact layout and full extent are difficult to pin down. On Hatteras Island, which is often linked with the name CROATOAN, archaeologists have found some European items from the late 16th century in contexts that suggest contact and exchange. Some researchers have also looked at mainland sites near the Albemarle Sound where English goods from the period have been reported. Interpretations vary, and the central caution remains: trade goods can move far from their source. A single object does not prove a permanent community, but it can show that people met, traded, and traveled. Archaeology in the Outer Banks region is challenging by nature. Shorelines migrate, storms cut new inlets and close old ones. A site that once sat inland can end up near open water, and a site that was once on a bank can end up under sand. The Earth keeps its own time, and it does not preserve every human plan. A brief recap closes the loop on the aftermath. After 1590, later searches and Jamestown-era rumors suggested possible survivors, but no decisive proof appeared. Modern archaeology offers small, cautious hints of contact and movement, while the central fate of the Roanoke colonists remains unknown. Chapter 8. The Quiet Shore. Tonight ends where the record becomes thin, on the Atlantic edge of North America, where dunes slope toward grass, and the Sound water lies dark behind them. In this landscape, a wooden post can rot, and a carving can fade. Yet the name CROATOAN has endured in ink and memory. It is a rare case where a single word on weathered wood became a permanent landmark in history. If the Roanoke settlers moved, they likely did so with ordinary objects that mattered most. Iron tools, a few firearms, cooking pots, blankets, and perhaps a Bible wrapped in cloth. Those items could pass through many hands, traded, kept, or lost, while the original story behind them dissolved. The settlement itself was never a city, and its disappearance was not an instant vanishing. It was a small community on a difficult coast, exposed to weather, dependent on supply lines, and entangled in diplomacy. Its routines were fragile: meals cooked in pots over small fires, repairs to roofs after storms, and watchful nights behind a palisade. John White returned in 1590 with a mind full of faces and a hope built from schedules and promises. What he found was not a scene of clear tragedy or clear survival. It was a site emptied of people, carefully dismantled in places and marked only by a destination carved into wood. In the centuries since, Roanoke has been revisited by writers, historians, archaeologists, and travelers, walking through museum exhibits and reconstructed earthworks. A visitor might stand near the Fort Raleigh site and look at a display case holding small fragments of pottery or metal. Those fragments are quiet things, and they do not speak in full sentences. The calm, scholarly view accepts both what is known and what is missing. The known is a chain of dates and names: Raleigh patent in 1584, early voyages and first contact, the Lane colony of 1585, evacuation in 1586, White return in 1587 with families, Virginia Dare birth, the long delay, and the 1590 discovery of abandonment with the carved word. The missing is everything that happened after White sailed away. Some nights, it helps to imagine the coastline as it is, not as a stage for mystery, but as a real place of water and wind. A boat moves across the sound at dusk. A line of trees holds still against a pale sky. Somewhere on a bank, sand covers what it covers, and the tide keeps coming in. The Roanoke story rests there, not resolved, not dramatized, simply held in the record as unknown. The carved word points in one direction, and the rest of the path disappears into marsh and forest. The history remains steady and incomplete, like a map with one corner worn away. Please subscribe and comment a topic for the next video.